Shalom. Welcome to the ministry of Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue. I'm Rabbi Scott. Welcome to our midweek teaching. We're working our way through the Torah, going parsha by parsha. A little bit behind the schedule, but that's okay. Trying to get caught up, and we will. But in the meantime, would appreciate any feedback that you might have as you go down this journey with us. I hear from many of you from week to week, so enjoy those dialogues and those discussions. So please reach out to us at the email that is shown in the description below this video. Likewise, if you want to subscribe to these videos, that would be great, and that would allow you to receive notifications whenever we are posting new videos as we go. And then for those of you who continue to support us, you can support us using the Easy Tithe at the address of our webpage in the description there. The link is there in the description below as well. For those of you who are doing this, we're just very, very grateful. If you'd like to do this in partnership with us in the work of the Kingdom of Adonai and the Gospel of Yeshua, then we'd be very grateful for that, of course. And lastly, if you're in Fort Myers and are interested in attending our services, we are having in-person services, we are having live services, and we have plenty of seating available on a social distance basis. Our chairs are spread out and our seating is spread out so that we're not in proximity with each other during these times. You're certainly welcome to join us. Please make whatever inquiries you like, or just show up on a Saturday morning on Shabbat at 11 a.m. and we would love to see you, and would enjoy fellowshipping with you and worshiping with you during these days, because that's what's happening. Is these are just very interesting times, and it's very important, I think, for our emotional and spiritual health to just be in fellowship with each other. So we're going to continue that fellowship in the Word here in the Torah, and this week we are. Well, like I said, we're taking it parsha by parsha, albeit we're a few weeks behind. This is Bo, parsha 15, from Shemot, from Exodus chapter 10 through chapter 13, verse 16. It says parsha number 15. Bo means to go. Adonai, we'll start with a summary, as we do. Adonai is speaking to Moses and telling him that he's going to harden Pharaoh's heart, so that these plagues, the world will know that he is the one true Elohim, the one true God. Pharaoh is warned about the plague of locusts and is told it's going to be very severe. The ground's going to be covered. Pharaoh agrees to release only the men, but Moses insists that everyone must go to worship Adonai. During the plague, of course, Pharaoh once again called for Moses and Aaron to remove the locusts. And he says that he has sinned, which is an interesting turn of phrase there coming from the mouth of Pharaoh. Adonai ends the plague, but hardens Pharaoh's heart again. Pharaoh fails to free the children of Israel. The country, except for the Jewish people, is then engulfed in another plague, and this one is a complete darkness, a darkness that can be felt, except for around the Jewish people. Pharaoh calls for Moses and tells him to take all the Jews out of Egypt, to leave their flocks behind. Moses tells him that not only will they take all their own flocks, but Pharaoh must add his own as well, upping the ante. It's kind of an interesting negotiation tactic there. Moses tells Pharaoh that Adonai is going to bring one more plague, the death of the firstborn, and then the children of Israel will leave Egypt. Adonai again hardens Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh warns Moses that he sees him again, he'll be put to death. Adonai tells Moses that in the month of Nisan will be the first month of the year. The children of Israel are commanded to take a sheep on this date, the 10th of the month, and guard it until the 14th. They're to take it into their houses. The sheep is then to be slaughtered as a Pesach, Passover sacrifice. Its blood is put on the doorposts, and its roasted meat is to be eaten. The blood on the doorposts will be a sign to the angel that Adonai will pass over that home when he comes to strike the firstborn of Egypt. The Jewish people are told to memorialize this day, keep this day, by never eating chametz and never eating leavened bread. Moses relays Adonai's commands. The Jewish people perform them flawlessly. Adonai sends the final plague, killing the firstborn, and Pharaoh sends the Jews out of Egypt. Adonai tells Moses and Aaron the laws concerning the Passover sacrifice and the redemption of the firstborn and of the tefillin. In our tradition, and that's the summary, of course, we borrow our summaries from Or Samech, just as a starting place, kind of a fun place to start. Again, they do a pretty good job of presenting the material. You can find summaries and commentaries all over the internet, and there's a lot of good content there. It's helpful to start with a summary. I always mention that just because it gets you up to speed quickly and can help you as you read through it kind of get a sense of your reading and not get lost in the text sometimes, as we have a habit of doing sometimes. All right, what are we going to talk about this week? Well, let's talk about in our tradition we make much of this matzah, the unleavened bread, the quick baking bread. We bake it within 18 minutes to ensure that there is no leavening, no rising, no yeasting kind of agent to puff up. It's a big part of our culture and our tradition, this unleavened bread. There's no leaven in it because they didn't have time to let their bread rise. They were in a hurry. This is kind of the legend of the unleavened bread during this time of the year. And again, we're getting ready to do Purim, which means we're getting ready to do Passover. And that's where we are at in our calendar this year. But in any case, Passover is just around the corner. We celebrate not only the Passover, which is eating the roasted meat, but we celebrate it eating matzah and maror. Matzah, of course, the unleavened bread. Maror, of course, being the bitter herbs. But it's not just the Pesach, the Passover. We keep this festival for a whole week. It's called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and we keep this for a whole week. And it's all around this idea of unleavened bread, which in their case was the matzah, the unleavened bread that they took out on their backs as they left Egypt. It's the original fast food. What do we do with fast food these days? We drive through in the drive-through in our car, and we get our burger or chicken strips or whatever it is, and we drive down the road eating our chicken strips. It's the original fast food. The matzah was. It's the Torah equivalent of a drive-through. You don't stop. You eat it on the go. Seems like there's a whole lot of rushing around, a whole lot of hurrying. I'd like to dig a little deeper into this rushing. We talk about the rushing in terms of the matzah, but there's another aspect to it, and that is just the intensity, the compression of this moment. Where does this come from? I mean, when you've conquered a people, when you have won a decisive victory in battle, and you have conquered the people, do you rush off? Do you head for the hills? Do you get out of Dodge? No, you stick around and you make the most of your conquest. You exploit your territory that you have conquered. In a sense, Adonai is going to conquer Pharaoh and Mitzrayim, Egypt. He's going to destroy them, and we can talk about the economics of the plagues, which had to have just completely decimated the economy and the livelihood and the lifestyle and the politics and the governance and the civilization of Egypt, especially going down to these last few, the locusts and the darkness and of course the plague of the firstborn, had to have just decimated their entire civilization. Legally, you think of the legal complications, but my question really is this: why did they rush out of town? Why did they get out of Dodge so fast? Why did they leave town so fast? You might think they could have stuck around for a couple weeks and got themselves organized, maybe really exploited the Egyptians, but they seem to be pressed out, and both from Pharaoh at his and at the people of Egypt, but also from Adonai, which is kind of marked and sort of memorialized in this matzah. Shemot, Exodus chapter 12, verse 39, they baked matzah loaves from the dough they had brought out of Egypt, since it was unleavened, because they had been driven out of Egypt without time to prepare supplies for themselves. In the Hebrew, vayofu et habatzek, asher hotziu mimitzrayim ugot matzot ki lo chametz ki gorshu mimitzrayim. They had this matzot, unleavened dough, because it didn't have any lo chametz, no chametz. For they had been driven gorshu mimitzrayim, driven out of Egypt. We've got this one line then, velo yachlu lehit meha. They could not wait. Vegam tzeda lo asu lachem. This one line, velo yachlu lehit mahameha. The root word here, the Hebrew root word here, maha, to linger, to tarry, to delay. They were driven out of Egypt without time to prepare supplies for themselves. They had to be driven out without lingering, without delay, without time to prepare. This word, maha, is an interesting word. If we trace this back, kind of focusing in on this press, this urgency, this compressed timeline here. The first place that we see this word in the Torah is another time that the characters had to rush, when they were out of time. Can you think of a time, a narrative in the Torah, when time was of the essence, when something had to happen and it had to happen quickly, it had to happen now, we couldn't delay, when time was compressed, when it was urgent? Some of you know what I'm talking about, and I have guessed correctly, of course. Some of you know the narrative of the destruction of Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah, the narrative of Lot and his family. What do we think of when we think, in the narrative of Lot, when we think of dragging their feet or delays of tarrying, what do we think of? We think of Lot's wife, when she was looking back and she was turned to salt. But actually there's more to this sort of lingering and delaying and tarrying and dragging your feet. Chapter 19, verse 12, the men, that is the men from Adonai, said to Lot, "Do you have any people here beside yourself? Whomever you have in the city, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, bring them out of this place, because we are going to destroy it. Adonai has become aware of the great outcry against them, and Adonai has sent us to destroy it." Verse 14, so Lot went out and spoke with his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, "Get up, leave this place, because Adonai is going to destroy the city." But his sons-in-law didn't take him seriously. And then we've got this line, verse 15. When morning came, the angels told Lot to hurry. So what just happened here? The men said to Lot, "Do you have any people here beside yourself, whomever you have in the city?" And so presumably Lot's going to go, round up his people and say, "We need to leave town," first thing in the morning. When morning came, the angels told Lot to hurry. "Get up," they said. "Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, otherwise you'll be swept away in the punishment of the city." Verse 16, but he dallied, he delayed. So the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters. Adonai was being merciful to him and led them, leaving them outside the city. All right, he said, when he brought them out, verse 17, he said, "Flee for your life, don't look around behind you, don't stop anywhere in the plain, but escape to the hills, otherwise you will be swept away." Okay, so here's another scenario where they need to get out of town in a hurry. They need to leave town and run away in a hurry. But what do we see here? We see that he dallied, he delayed. Morning came. It was at night when they told him to leave, and morning came. And they're like, "Get up, you need to take your wife and your 2. And he still, even though the angels told him to get up, still he dallied, still he delayed, so that the men had to actually grab his hands and drag him out of the city. And when they came out, they only came out with his wife's hand, the hands of his 2 daughters. Adonai was merciful to him. So what do we have here? We've got the daughters of Lot, which appear to be married, but we also had the daughters of Lot who were virgins, who hadn't been with any men. And those were the two daughters that Lot was going to throw out into the crowd. So what are we talking about here? Lot was unsuccessful at getting his daughters and their sons-in-law, the ones who apparently were married, to leave the city. But eventually it appears that perhaps they were all in the same house together, that it is Lot, his wife, and his two unmarried daughters. That's my conjecture on the text. Seems to be the common sense reading of what's happening here. But this is what you have here. It says this: flee for your life. Don't look behind you, and don't stop anywhere on the plain, but escape to the hills. Otherwise, you'll be swept away. And what do we know, of course, from the story that Lot's wife looked back and she turned into a column of salt. But what I want to bring your attention to is this verse 16. Vayit mama, while he delayed. This again is that same Hebrew root word, the maha. Skip ahead to Bereshit, chapter 43 of Genesis, verse 10. This is after the first trip to Egypt for the brothers, the sons of Jacob. They went to Egypt to buy grain, and they went and they met with Joseph, and he accused them of being spies, and he promptly had Simeon thrown in prison. Joseph is holding him as a ransom against the brothers, bringing Benjamin down the next time they need grain. Of course, the response of the father, Jacob, is that you'll not take Benjamin because I don't want to lose my other son. I lost my first son, Joseph, and I'm not going to lose Benjamin. And so there's a delay. They're not going to go down, and they're not going to get grain, and they're certainly not going to bring Benjamin for Joseph to see. All right. So meanwhile, Simeon is languishing in prison in Egypt, and Joseph is holding him as a ransom against the brothers returning Benjamin. Jacob will not part with Benjamin even to the point of death, and this is step one of the redemption and restoration of Judah. Judah will offer his own life as a surety, as a ransom for Benjamin. Remember, Reuben offered something as well in the previous chapter 42, I believe, the end of 42. We see this where Reuben is offering his two sons. He's offering his two sons to be put to death if they don't bring back Benjamin to Jacob. This is in contrast to Judah, who is willing to give up his life as a surety for Benjamin. This is Reuben exposing his desire for prominence and power. It's an easy thing to put to death your children. It doesn't cost you. In his mind, it doesn't cost him personally. Judah is willing to become himself the sacrifice. Reuben is willing to sacrifice his children for his desire for prominence and power in the family. Reuben is jockeying for political leadership of the family. That's one of the things that's happening here. One of the sages speaks of, I'm sorry, I don't remember which one now. One of the sages speaks of there being three bechorot, of any family. The first Bechorot is the legal Bechor, the firstborn, and that is the one who inherits all the wealth and property. The second Bechor is the spiritual Bechor, the one who is going to lead the family into the kingdom. And then the third would be the political Bechor, the one who's going to represent the mission and vision of the family, the political persuasion, the positions that the family takes. And sometimes you have overlaps with those, and sometimes you have you'll have an overlap, or you have one person occupying all three roles, or sometimes there's a failure in a dysfunctional family, and those things never get transmitted until they're transferred until the following generation. But I think it's a principle, a spiritual principle, that the Bechor is Lador Vador, from generation to generation, albeit that sometimes it does skip a generation, which again is something we see in the kingdom in the modern day, when you see the gifts and callings of generations being handed down from generation to generation. Sometimes skipping a generation is one of the phenomenon that we observe in our lives and our families and friends' lives. So just a little sidebar there. Bereshit chapter 43, verse 8, Yehuda told Israel, his father, send the boy with me, and we will make preparations and leave. so that we may stay alive and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I myself will guarantee his safety. This is Judah guaranteeing the safety of Benjamin. You can hold me responsible if I fail to bring him to you and present him to your face. Let me bear the blame forever. And this is Judah's attempt to persuade Jacob to let Judah take Benjamin down to Egypt. And then we got this, verse 10. Except for our lengthy delay, it says in this translation, I believe this might be Tree of Life version or maybe complete Jewish version, the CJB. Except for our lengthy delay, we would have been there again by now. Kilule hit mamanu. Mamanu. Again, we've got another iteration of this maha verb in the Hebrew, which is to tarry, to delay, to wait, and so forth. Now, going back to this heat, lehit, mamanu, at this point, there are at least a few rabbis who teach a connection, who teach this from the perspective of a connection between Judah and the haste, and Israel and the haste to leave. And you'll find that teaching in various places, and it's fascinating, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but I think I'd like to go in a little different direction. It looks like this. How does one become a slave? How does one become enslaved? We don't have examples of slavery in modern times, except for few and far between. But historically, we can look at this. There's basically three paths to becoming a slave. There's three ways that you become a slave. The first path would be to be conquered in war. Your people, your nation, your village, your town is conquered in a battle in war, and you are all captured, and you are marched off to be a slave. And you're either sold and traded as a slave, or you become a slave of the immediate conquering army or power. You lose all rights, you lose all property, you are now a full-on slave, and your destiny is not your own. You belong to somebody else. The second path to becoming a slave is to be kidnapped. Historically, we have many examples of this in Western culture and civilization. Examples of press gangs in the cities of New England and in the UK, where people would be kidnapped and placed on an outbound ship, and would wake up on an outbound ship and would find themselves serving on a sailing vessel for a length of time, trying to earn back their freedom. We also saw this extensively in sub-Saharan Africa, on the African continent, in the probably late 1600s to 1700s, which led to the supply of slaves, which were in huge demand in the Western Hemisphere, especially in the southeastern United States and the South Atlantic and tropical islands, these kind of things. The third path to enslavement is an economic path. We don't see this much in our economy because our understanding of poverty is so different than the rest of the history of the world. But in times past, poverty was a very desperate position to be in. In historical times, it may have been prudent to consider slavery. Better to be a slave of a wealthy man than to be poor and free. Poverty in America is not like poverty in history. Being poor in history meant that you had no rights, no resources, and no security. It was a very desperate position to be in, the truly deeply poor. And so in some cases, it may have been considered better to be a slave in that, as abhorrent as that is to our modern perspective and our modern proclivities. It may have been considered prudent to consider slavery. So these are the three paths, if you will, to enslavement. The third one being if you would perhaps sell yourself as a slave, or if you go into debt and you can give yourself as a slave or be taken as a slave to cover your debts, or if you have some sort of financial crises and you're left with no alternatives. So how did Israel become slaves? They came to Egypt willingly under Jacob. They came under the best of circumstances. They were going to live a very cushy life and a very blessed life. But this is all under Jacob and under Joseph. 230 years later, they're unable to leave. What happened? What happened between the time of Joseph and the time of Moses, where they faced such incredible persecution? Well, we have the initial clues at the beginning of Shemot, Exodus chapter 1, the Pharaoh who had forgotten Joseph and apparently also forgotten the plagues and forgotten, or not the plagues, but the famine, and had forgotten everything else as well. That's certainly a part of it. But I think there's another clue in these words, that they didn't have time to let their bread rise. They were supposed to not delay in going down to Egypt. We see this hinted at in Judah's words. We could have been there by now. They should have reunited Jacob with Joseph sooner. That should have been accomplished. And by the time Judah is saying, I'll step in and I will be the assurity for my family, I will be the I will be the assurance for my family. I will be the Mashiach, the Messiah to my family, in order to guarantee their safety. By the time that Judah gets around to saying that, in the context of needing to go down there to get grain, they were long overdue to reunite Jacob and Joseph. So this is where we are. But remember, they had this delay going down to Egypt, but they should not delay when they leave Egypt. Remember Lot. Remember Lot spent the night before Sodom was destroyed. If there's going to be some sort of holy destruction rain down on the earth, as soon as I find out about that, I need to leave town. I don't need to delay. And it says there explicitly in the text that he delayed, that Lot delayed. He went around town, apparently perhaps hanging out with his sons-in-law and discussing life with them and trying to persuade them. Didn't really have the sense of urgency until the morning, and even at the morning still didn't have a sense of urgency when the angel said to get up. Presumably they were reclining or sleeping or somehow not engaged, not motivated. But in the early morning, they were grabbed by the hands and they were pulled out of the city. But contrast this, but see the similarities, the contrasting similarities, which is what we see oftentimes in the Torah, is contrasting similarities. See the contrasting similarity here with the plague of the firstborn. A night has passed. This night is the night of destruction in the story, the narrative of Lot. It is the morning which brought destruction, not the nightfall which brought destruction. In the Exodus narrative, it was after the destruction that Israel was to leave, and in Sodom and Gomorrah it was before the destruction that they were to leave. So we have those kind of contrasting similarities, and then we have Lot's reluctance to leave town, and then we have the urgency of the people of Israel, Bnei Israel, putting their unleavened dough on their backs. So we have this, Shemot chapter 12. Pharaoh got up in the night, verse 30. He and all his servants. This is the evening or the night, in the middle of the night of the Passover. He and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a horrendous wailing in Egypt. I like this translation because it says it correctly. There was a horrific wailing, horrendous wailing in Egypt, for there wasn't a single house without someone dead in it. And we've talked about the psychology of this. He summoned Moshe and Aaron by night. In other words, while it was still night. He said, up. Right? There's that up. Remember what the angel said to Lot? Get up. Leave my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go. Serve Adonai, as you said. Take both your flocks and your herds, as you said, and get out of here, but bless me too. The Egyptians pressed to send the people out of the land quickly because they said, otherwise we'll all be dead. So again, we've got a lot of urgency happening here. So what is happening in all this haste? Mitzrayim al ha'am lemaher lasalachim min haaretz. Mahar is the Hebrew word. Remember, we were talking about the Hebrew word maha. This is mahar, which means to hasten, to be quick. So maha is to delay, to tarry, to waste time. Mahar is the Hebrew word meaning to hasten. This is the contrasting similarity, the parallel in these two narratives. And what it should do is give us a sense of the urgency of why they needed to leave. All right, but again, what's really being said here? Let me look at it. Let me talk to you about it this way. What was the essence of the hardening of Pharaoh's heart? What was happening when Pharaoh's heart was hardened? What is the essence of that? What does that really mean? It means to delay the inevitable. The scenario with Lot and Sodom was inevitable. The scenario with Judah and Benjamin was inevitable. It was inevitable that Judah was going to have to take Benjamin to Egypt. There's no reason to delay this. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. But with each inevitable moment, there's also profound risk. In other words, inevitable moments ought to bring, again, it's the mahar and the mahar. It's either urgency or delay, and there's profound risk. In either case, there's profound risk. If Judah does not return to Egypt, then the dreams of Joseph are defeated, and we've lost that generation. There's profound risk if Lot does not leave Sodom. The righteous man described in the book of Hebrews, Messianic Jews, Brit Chadashah, would not have been described as a righteous man. He would not have been saved. He would not have saved anything. The profound risk that Israel would have been lost to history would not have come out as a great nation if they had delayed coming out of Egypt. It is by their haste in their exodus that they are defined. The exodus is how we are defined and known as Bnei Israel. It is the most profound historical event in the annals of humanity. And Adonai describes it saying, can a nation be born in a day? This is what is described. A people who are known by the Exodus, a people who are known by the Passover with its matzah and maror, this unleavened bread, this urgency, this haste of fleeing slavery. So what is the point of all this? And here's what I would submit to you is kind of one of the spiritual takeaways, a rather elemental lesson, if you will, and that is when liberty and freedom and deliverance are offered to you, you have to take it. And there's a sense in which Adonai is capitalizing on the momentum of the plagues, and especially the previous three plagues, the locust, the darkness, and the plague of the firstborn. Adonai is almost using those three together to create a momentum by which nobody's going to delay the way Lot delayed, the way Jacob delayed. Nobody's going to be slow to this. It's almost like the momentum and the haste is all coming to a high point, a flash point. And this is what I would suggest to you, and this is more of a preaching point than anything, and that is, in your life, when Adonai brings you deliverance, and he does, he brings us deliverance. All of us have had a moment of clarity with our wrestlings, with our struggles, with our flesh, with our burdens. All of us have had a moment of clarity, and many of us have struggled because following the moment of clarity, we neglect to act decisively and energetically, and we miss an opportunity. And this is the nature of it here. And this is what I would say to you, is that Adonai is creating a momentum here where Israel was not going to miss this opportunity. In the same way that Lot had his hands grabbed and drug out of the city by the men of Adonai. Israel is being thrown and cast out of the city, out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, and with great plunder and with everything. Again, it is by this moment in human history, this Exodus, this coming out, this Shemot or not Shemot, but this Exodus of the people of Israel. It is by this that they are known throughout the earth, among other things. But it is one of the prime characteristics of our people, of our experience. And then we have this over and over and over again. We see this. What does Adonai say throughout the balance of the Torah? Ani Adonai, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, who brought you out of Egypt, who brought you out of Mitzrayim. Adonai identifies himself with this event, this urgent haste of leaving Egypt. And what do we have as the commemoration of that haste and of that sort of deliverance? Because again, we ask ourselves the question, like we would have with Lot or with Judah, what would have happened if they had delayed? I mean, we know what happened, and this is the telling part about it. If Israel had delayed, if Bnei Israel had delayed coming out of Mitzrayim, what do we think would happen? Well, we know what would happen because they wandered through the desert. And this is Adonai showing Israel and showing us what would have happened if they had delayed. If they had delayed, Israel is wandering through the desert, and Adonai purposefully leads them by a wandering course so that Pharaoh will say, look, they are lost in the desert and they don't know where to go. And they back up against the Sea of Reeds, the Yam Suf, and there, when they're there, then Pharaoh comes to attack them. Well, what do we think would have happened if Israel had delayed, if they had tarried in Egypt and not come out? Then they surely would have been destroyed. All of Egypt would have rose up against them and destroyed them. It wouldn't have been just the boys. It would have been thrown in the Nile. The entire people would have been wiped out, and there would have only been a remnant that would have been preserved. But it speaks of Adonai and his provision, again, providing them the momentum and the motivation to escape, to be delivered, to step into the deliverance. And I do think this is a challenge for us, that many times we miss our own deliverance in delays and in negligence and in failure to capitalize on the momentum that Adonai has invested in us in our struggles and in the grace that he's given us. But that's for you to explore and for you to work out. If you would like to discuss any of these topics or anything, by all means, please reach out to me. I would enjoy speaking with you. And in the meantime, may Adonai bless you this week, and we will join you again next week. Shalom, shalom.